Thank you so much, and good afternoon to you all. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I've been to Amity University a number of times, but I have never actually stood in front of such a distinguished audience before to speak. So this is really a special, special honor. Speaking of speaking, when you come after the kind of speech that Professor Singh gave, and then followed by Her Excellency Harinder Sidhu, they covered so much ground that you are actually at a disadvantage in speaking about anything, because you don't quite know what it is that you could say that would improve upon the silence. But then you have an advantage. In this case, actually, the advantage is yours. When you come at the kind of place where I have come, and there's not much left to say, you will not have to suffer very long with my speech. So you have that advantage. And I've been sitting there thinking what it is that I could add to this conversation that would add value. And I have chosen to speak about the nature of what we are trying to do with Amity University, and how that is the beginning of a paradigm shift in transnational education. That's where I want to focus. But let me go back and give you a bit of a background on my personal thinking, and perhaps give you a sense of why it is that I'm so passionate about this whole idea of a new paradigm for transnational education. I was born in Punjab, and the Punjab of, I was born in 1954, so it was a very different Punjab than the Punjab that exists today, or the India that exists today. And some of the things that I remember, that my family comes from central rural Punjab, that Punjabi, when you're not in Punjab, you think of Punjabi as one language. But if you go to Punjab, or at least if you had gone to Punjab of even 1970s, you would have noticed that the language actually changes every about 20 kilometers. There's a different dialect. And some of the dialects can be so different that you actually may have difficulty. If you speak one, you would be at times lost when you hear the other dialect. I also remember that when I was a child, most of our relatives were within about 20-kilometer radius. I would say 99% of my relatives were within about 20-kilometer radius. Marriages happened within that radius. So essentially, you had your sphere within a circle which was about as big as you could walk or perhaps travel on a horseback. That's how Punjab had been for millennia. So mobility was a very important determining factor. Communication was another thing that, that restricted expansion of these radii of your activity. I left India in 1978 to study in Australia, and for young people today, this could be something like almost like a science fiction kind of a thing, or perhaps from Stone Age history of the world, that I would write a letter to my parents from Australia, and the letter would take about 2 weeks to arrive in India. And then they would write a letter back to me. It would take another 2 weeks for that letter to arrive. So I was essentially always reading history that was about a month old. That was the extent of communication. Today, I have, my wife and I live in Australia. We have 2 daughters in Canada and 2 granddaughters. And every day we wake up in the morning, and the first thing we do is go on FaceTime and have a chat with them. And we actually sometimes, they're having dinner and we're having breakfast, and we do it together with the iPad sitting in the middle. That's the way the communication changed, and that has changed the entire nature of how we communicate, how we work, where we live, and how we relate to one another. Certainly the marriages have changed. They no longer get married within 20-kilometer radius. So that's the way the world has changed. And in this world, the need is for us to be able to work across national boundaries. The world has truly become that global village that Alvin Toffler wrote about in the 1970s when he was talking about future shock. I take my example. I was born in India. educated in India and Australia. I'm a Canadian citizen, spent most of my life in Canada. I have recently moved to Australia as a permanent resident of Australia, hoping to someday have a home I actually still have a house in Canada, and have a home which is in Canada and in Australia. And I'm working, as I speak today, on Australia-India relationship, and I feel totally at ease and totally at comfort being an Indian and being an Australian, being a Canadian at the same time. That's how the things have changed, and those things influence our daily lives. Let me give you another example. 1965, India and Pakistan went to war with each other. It was a brutal war, short-lived, but brutal war. General Saab would remember that. And my older brother, he had just finished his mechanical engineering degree, and he was looking for a job. And he applied for a job at Heavy Engineering Corporation in Ranchi, Bihar. Right? So he went for his interview. He went from Punjab just after the war, and is sitting in an interview in Ranchi, and all they were asking him about was what's happening in Punjab with the war, because war was actually at the border of Punjab, the two Punjab, eastern and western Punjab. So poor was the information flow and the impact of that, of events in one area on the other. That in Bihar, they were largely untouched by a war that India was fighting in Punjab and in Kashmir and so on, or Rajasthan at this time. That was the disconnect between, so what happened in Punjab didn't really impact even a person in Bihar. Now let's talk about a bit of a mini war that has been happening for the last couple of weeks in the markets, international markets. So the markets have been in turmoil. This is a business audience, so you know, you're obviously following what has been happening in the stock exchanges around the world. If it starts in Tokyo, within seconds it spreads to London and New York and so on. So that's the first thing. Events are interconnected. They spread with a lightning speed across the whole world, and before we even knew something was happening, the markets had lost about 4% of the value. So that's the first thing that happens. Second thing, how it impacts you. Now when I saw that happening, I had a very uncomfortable feeling sitting in Canberra in my stomach, because I am now at an age where I'm starting to think about my retirement. And I have a little bit of money, very hard-earned money, which is invested largely in the international arena, right? And I saw not only the markets in turmoil and the value of tumbling, I saw the security of my retirement tumbling at the same time, in the same value, because my life is dependent on what is happening in the market, and it doesn't matter whether it's happening in Tokyo, or it's happening in Bombay, or it's happening in New York, or wherever else in the world. We are all interconnected. All of us are affected by that. That is the nature of the world we live in. So, what you would ask, what does that have to do with Amity and University of Canberra? So let me come to that point. Today, I had a fascinating encounter. Woke up this morning and got picked up at the hotel by a young student from Amity University. And I asked him, what do you do? He says, I'm studying international business. Then he quickly said, I'm, sir, also doing business. I said, tell me about your business. What are you doing? He says, well, sir, I have multiple businesses. I am supplying chemicals, and he told me about a couple of international markets where he has connections, where he's supplying some chemicals that are used in cosmetics. I'm also trading holy colors. He says that's a market, that's a short-lived market, but it's a very important market. And I'm interested in solar energy, and I have a new product that I'm trying to market. This is a Bachelor of Business student at Amity University. That's how the young people of today are working, and he's also a student and also running these 4 different businesses. 2 years ago, I was at Hangzhou Normal University in China, where Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, has set up a business school focused on e-commerce. We walked into a room like this. The dean took us into this room, which was about double the size of this room, full of students. And as he walked in, he says to me, he says, the students sitting in this room, between them, they are running companies that are generating business worth about 200 million yuan a year. These are undergraduate students generating business worth 200 million yuan a year. Just to put it in context, if you're not familiar with the exchange rate, that is about 40 million Australian dollars a year, and this is a bunch of kids doing that. These are the people we are trying to educate. These are the people who we as professors, as administrators of universities are responsible for. We have to figure out how do we deliver value to these people. These are not people who are thinking about a little village that I grew up in, or what happens in the life within a 20-kilometer radius that I spoke about. These people have no boundaries. They know no boundaries. They don't know national boundaries, international boundaries. They don't know racial, linguistic boundaries. They just work across the entire world. These are the people we are educating, and this is what transnational education is all about, that we have to be able to give them the tools that enhance their innate capabilities that they are using by doing the kind of things that the young Amity student I spoke about. Actually, by the way, he wasn't the only one. I met about half a dozen of them later on who are doing similar things. There's something in the DNA of Amity that's doing these amazing things. Now, but that still is not about paradigm shift. So let me now zero in the last minute or so to speak about the paradigm shift that I'm becoming increasingly passionate about. But before I do that, let me speak about the value of access to education. We have a Chancellor at the University of Canberra, Professor Tom Kalma, who is the first Aboriginal man to ever be appointed Chancellor of a university in Australia. Quite remarkable. The University of Canberra has a habit of breaking the boundaries. So Professor Tom Kalma, actually, one of his famous quotes is that education is vaccination against poverty. It is vaccination against poverty. And that's the part that makes me passionate about transnational education. And let me tell you from a personal example why. Now, I'm Vice-Chancellor of one of the leading universities in Australia. I had the privilege of being a Vice President of one of the leading universities in the world, University of Toronto, and so on. But let me tell you where my roots are from and how education has shaped those. The shaping of my education actually started before I was even born, and that was with my dad. My dad was born in a rather poor peasant farming family. My grandfather was a subsistence farmer in the district of Jalandhar, a very small piece of land on which he was trying to raise 5 children. All of them worked on the farm. That's the only way they could make a living. And one day, my dad, as they were working on the little farm, my dad was sent to get something from home that they needed on the farm. And as he was walking home, he was the youngest one, the least useful on the farm, so that's why he was sent back to fetch this thing from home. As he was walking home, he ran into a small crowd in front of the local village, Sikh Temple Gurdwara, where they had just opened one-room primary school, first school in the village. And a teacher took him by the arm and gave him some laddu. That's, for those of you who know, that's an Indian sweet. So gave him a laddu that they were passing around to celebrate the opening of the school, and gave him a little book, a qaida, with some pictures and some letters that he knew nothing about. And my father sat down there, didn't probably even realize what was actually happening at that moment. And never went home, never returned to the farm. He was actually punished very badly by his oldest brother for not doing what he was asked to do. But what happened that day, as my dad happened to, totally by accident, run into this crowd and sat down and got enrolled in the school, was that he started his path on the educational journey. He had a very benevolent teacher who convinced my grandfather to let him educate one of his sons. And my dad turned out to be a brilliant student, finished high school, went on to join India's Forestry Service, where he got a forestry degree, and retired as a senior administrator in India's Forest Service. With that, the entire course of my family changed. That is my family, my part of the lineage of the family. I've been to my ancestral village. I still have cousins who are toiling on a fraction of that piece of land which they have inherited. And I have gone on to be a Vice-Chancellor at University of Canberra. That is the transformative power of education. Now, I have been in the international education world for a long time now, and one of the things that I see is that it is accessible, essentially, to people with wealth and privilege. I don't come from that wealth and privilege. And I have been always very sensitive to this. How can we make international education and transnational education accessible to those who cannot afford it but have the ability to do it? My dad had that ability. He didn't go abroad to study, but he got access to education. Today, the equivalent of that is transnational education, because we have to form the citizens of the world. So the agreement that Amity and us are signing, that is about bringing the cost of education down, cost of international education down, recognizing the realities that the cost of delivery in Australia is much higher than the cost of delivery in India. And how can we create a hybrid system where you offer a win-win situation to potential students who want to study abroad and who want to also have the benefit of their roots, the anchor in the Indian system, where there is so much additional and complementary stuff to learn, and combining these two. So this is what our MOU that we're going to sign today is about. By breaking the barriers, making education a bit more accessible. It is not going to be accessible to everybody. Again, we spoke about not pretending about things. So we're not pretending that this is going to be accessible to everybody, but it's going to be more accessible than the existing model of international education, where you go abroad and you pay hefty international fees and you receive your degree from a distinguished university abroad. This is about bringing two distinguished universities together and lowering the cost of it. So with that, all I would say is that today we are signing this memorandum of understanding. We are in the advanced stages of essentially dotting the I's and crossing the T's of a formal agreement that we expect to implement within the next few weeks. We're not looking at years, and hopefully be able to start admissions to this new collaborative and large-scale venture between Amity University and University of Canberra. India remains in my heart. It remains one of the three homes in my heart for me. And I'm hoping very much that with this new initiative, I would have the joy of playing a small part in bringing at least two of the homes together into a practical alliance. Thank you again.